"You're not invited to the gala." That was the message I got just 2 hours before it started, from my dad. He added, "This event is for high-level clients. Family doesn't belong." I didn't reply, didn't ask why. I just put my phone down and let the silence do the talking. That night, my sister-in-law posted a photo from the gala. Perfect smiles, perfect lighting, everyone who mattered except me. The caption read, "So peaceful without certain useless relatives." I saw it. I closed the app. Still not a single word from me. They thought that was the end of it. But at midnight, the lights dimmed, the music softened, and the manager stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "please welcome the person who personally approved tonight's gala and made this entire celebration possible." I walked in. I smiled. I raised my glass. "Happy New Year," I said, "and thank you for being here tonight." Silence. Pale faces. That was how the new year began. But to understand why that moment mattered, you need to know what came before it. I am in my early 30s, old enough that people assume I have settled into who I am, young enough that my family still talks about me like I am unfinished business. I am the daughter who never caused a scene, never demanded attention, never needed rescuing. The one who was always described as steady, which was their polite way of saying unremarkable. In our family, there were two roles. My older brother was the success story, the one people bragged about at holidays. His job titles got repeated, his decisions got second-guessed loudly and then praised anyway. He was the one who took risks. I was the one who made sensible choices. He was impressive. I was acceptable. It played out the same way every time we were together. At Thanksgiving dinner last year, my brother announced he was considering a new investment opportunity. My dad put down his fork immediately. "Tell me more," he said, leaning forward. "What is the structure? Who else is involved? What is the timeline?" My brother explained for 15 minutes. Everyone listened. My mom nodded along like he was delivering a keynote speech. My sister-in-law recorded part of it for her Instagram story, captioning it, "Business Talks with the Family Genius." Later, when there was a pause in conversation, I mentioned a contract I had just closed, a significant one, the kind that took months to negotiate and would change the trajectory of my entire operation. "That is nice," my mom said without looking up. Then she turned to my sister-in-law. "Did you finalize the seating chart for Christmas dinner?" The conversation moved on. I did not try to bring it back. My dad was not cruel. That is the part that took me the longest to understand. He cared deeply about how things looked, about smooth surfaces and calm impressions. Conflict embarrassed him. He believed that harmony mattered more than fairness, and he always chose the option that kept everything looking intact from the outside. If that meant asking me to step back, he did it without hesitation. He trusted I would understand, and I always did, until I did not. Family decisions worked the same way. If plans changed, I was the flexible one. If something needed to be adjusted, I was expected to adjust. When there was tension, I was the one quietly told to let it go. Not because I was wrong, but because I was easier. "Just let it go," my dad would say when I pushed back on anything. "It is not worth the fight." Over time, letting go became my assigned contribution to the family. The year-end gala had been on the family calendar for months. It was framed as a client event, a celebration, a way to close out the year with the right people in the room. My brother talked about it like it was a milestone in his career. My sister-in-law talked about it like it was a stage for her next photo opportunity. Outfits were discussed. Photos were planned. Guest lists were refined. I knew about the gala. I knew when it started. I knew the schedule. I knew more about it than they realized. But I did not ask for an invitation. I did not assume I would be included. I did not want to force the question. There is a difference between not being invited and not asking to be. I had learned that early. If I did not ask, I could not be told no out loud. I could pretend the omission was accidental. That was the quiet compromise I had made with myself years ago. The day of the gala, I went about my morning as usual. No special outfit laid out. No plans canceled. Just a normal day that happened to end with everyone else dressing up without me. I checked my phone in the afternoon and saw messages flying back and forth in the family group chat. Logistics, timing, jokes I was not part of. Then 2 hours before it started, my dad's message arrived. Direct, private, cleanly worded like something he had rehearsed. This event is for high-level clients. Family doesn't belong. No apology, no explanation beyond that. Just a line drawn where I had apparently been standing the whole time without realizing it. I stared at the message longer than I want to admit, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed something I had been trying not to name. This was not an oversight. It was a decision, and it had been made with enough confidence that he did not think it needed discussion. I did not respond. That part was intentional. If I replied, it would become a conversation. If it became a conversation, I would be expected to soften it to make it easier for him. Silence was the only way to refuse the role I was being handed. That night, while the event was happening without me, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was not a message. It was a notification. My sister-in-law had posted a photo. They were all there, my parents, my brother, her. Standing close, smiling, the kind of smiles meant for public consumption. Everything about the image was polished. The lighting was flattering. The framing was careful. It looked like the kind of photo people post when they want the world to believe something very specific about their lives. The caption was worse than the exclusion. So peaceful, without certain useless relatives. It was not subtle. It was not ambiguous. It was meant to be seen, and it was meant to land. I waited for someone to say something, to comment, to step in, to signal that maybe this had gone too far. No one did. The likes started rolling in. Compliments followed. Laughing emojis, agreement disguised as humor. I closed the app. I did not screenshot it. I did not text anyone privately. I did not defend myself. I did not correct the story they were telling. Instead, I did one thing. I followed the plan I already had. I changed clothes, not into anything dramatic, just into what I had already set aside. I checked the time. I checked my calendar. I made sure I was exactly where I needed to be, exactly when I needed to be there. I did not rush. I did not hesitate. I did not second-guess myself. They thought silence meant I had nothing to say. They never asked what silence was protecting. People think I stayed quiet because I was weak. That is not why. I stayed quiet because every time I spoke, the room decided what my words meant before I finished saying them. I learned early that explanation did not clarify anything in my family. It rearranged blame. When I talked, I was not heard. I was translated. My intentions became inconveniences. My concerns turned into overreactions. My questions got reframed as attitude. Silence was not surrender. It was damage control. I did not start out that way. I used to speak. I used to believe that if I explained myself clearly enough, someone would meet me halfway. I used to think fairness lived somewhere between patience and persistence. But in our house, volume mattered less than timing, and timing mattered less than who was speaking. There were rules no one wrote down, but everyone enforced. If you talked too much, it was difficult. If you did not talk, you were easygoing. Guess which label stuck longer? The moment I understood the rules happened at a family meeting when I was 23. We were planning a holiday trip. Where to stay? Who would drive? How to split costs? I suggested we rent a house instead of booking separate hotel rooms. It would be cheaper. We would have a kitchen, more space for everyone to spread out. My mom paused. My dad sighed. "That seems complicated," my mom said. "Hotels are easier," my dad added. "Let's not overthink this." I nodded and let it go. 10 minutes later, my brother said almost the exact same thing. Different words, same idea. What if we got a vacation rental? Might be more cost-effective. Plus, we could cook together. The room shifted. "That is actually smart," my dad said. "Good thinking." My mom smiled. "I like that idea." I watched the decision land on him like it had always been his. No one looked at me. No one remembered I had said the same thing moments earlier. That was the first time I understood the double standard was not personal. It was structural. From then on, I started noticing patterns. When my brother argued a point, he was passionate. When I did, I was emotional. When he pushed back on a decision, he was confident. When I did, I was creating tension. When he needed accommodation, a loan, a favor, a schedule change, the family adjusted. When I needed the same, I was told to be flexible. I did not resent him for it. He did not build the system. He just benefited from it. The system existed long before either of us learned how to use it. My dad played a specific role in all of this. He was not cruel. That is what made it harder to name. He loved calm the way other people love truth. He believed that peace meant success, that the absence of raised voices meant things were working. When conflict appeared, he did not ask who was right. He asked who would back down faster. The answer was always me. "You're the reasonable one," he would tell me. "You understand." I did understand. I understood that reasonable meant easier to ignore. At first I agreed because I wanted approval. Then I agreed because I wanted quiet. Eventually, I agreed because fighting never changed anything anyway. The family learned something from that. They learned that I would bend. They learned that if they needed a plan to move forward smoothly, they could move it around me. They learned they did not have to check in because I would adapt, and adaptation slowly turned into erasure. I stopped being consulted on things that affected me. Decisions got made and announced after the fact. Plans changed without warning. Invitations came late if they came at all. No one framed it as exclusion. They called it logistics. They called it oversight. They called it efficiency. I called it a pattern. And patterns once established do not require justification anymore. They just run. When my sister-in-law joined the family, the system did not break. It was upgraded. She was good at presentations. She understood angles, lighting, the careful curation of moments that looked effortless online. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She shaped the story with captions and timing. She knew when to post and what to omit. And she understood something. I had spent years learning the hard way. Whoever controls the narrative controls the memory. I did not compete with her. I did not try to outshine or correct or insert myself into her version of the family. I watched how quickly the center of gravity shifted. Suddenly, family events had themes. Photos had purpose. Absences had meaning. I was not actively pushed out. I was edited out. It was cleaner that way. Around that time, people stopped asking about my work. At first, it felt like relief. No more polite nods. No more interruptions. No more simplified summaries for people who did not care about details. Then it became something else. My silence filled in with assumptions. If I did not talk about my job, it would not be impressive. If I did not post about it, it must not matter. If I was not stressed, it must not be serious. They built a version of my life that required no curiosity. There was one moment when I tried again. Just once. At a family dinner, my uncle asked what I was working on. I started to explain. A negotiation I had been handling for months. The complexity of the deal, the stakes involved. 2 sentences in my sister-in-law interrupted. "Speaking of timelines," she said, turning to my mom, "we need to finalize the guest list for the holiday party." The table turned to her. My explanation dissolved. No one noticed I had stopped mid-thought. That was the last time I volunteered information without being asked directly. After that, I stopped correcting their assumptions. I stopped explaining my decisions. I stopped chasing understanding from people who had already decided what I was worth. Silence became a filter. It let me see who paid attention and who only reacted. I talked less at family gatherings and listened more. I noticed how often people spoke about me without looking at me. How decisions got framed as consensus even when I had not weighed in. How my absence was interpreted as agreement. I started keeping my real decisions outside that room, not to be secretive, to be sane. My dad noticed the change but misread it. He thought I was content, that I had accepted my place. He mistook restraint for resignation. From his perspective, things were smoother, fewer disagreements, less friction. He did not ask what it cost me. He did not ask what I was building outside the family's field of vision. He did not ask because he assumed he already knew. By the time the gala came around, the system was fully operational. Of course, he did not think twice about sending that message. In his mind, he was not excluding me. He was maintaining order. He believed I would understand. He believed I would adapt. He believed silence meant consent. What he never considered was that silence can be selective, that it can be a boundary instead of a concession, that it can hold things rather than give them up. I stayed quiet because speaking had never been the lever that moved anything in that room. By the time they stopped asking what I did for a living, I had already learned not to answer. They assumed nothing had changed because nothing had changed for them. What they never considered was that change doesn't always announce itself. No sudden upgrade they could point to, no obvious pivot that demanded recognition. What they never considered was that change does not always announce itself, and progress does not always look loud when you are not the audience it is meant for. My family knew in the loosest sense what I did. They could summarize it in a sentence if pressed, something vague about restaurants, operations, management. It was the kind of explanation that allowed them to move on quickly, satisfied that they had placed me somewhere familiar. What they did not know was what filled my days. How many decisions sat behind that single sentence, how much thinking happened before anything visible ever did. They mistook awareness for understanding, and I let that gap exist because closing it had never changed anything. There were moments when I tried. Early on, before I learned the limits of that room, I would answer questions honestly. Someone would ask how work was going, and I would explain a challenge I was working through, the trade-offs, the variables. I rarely made it to the end of a thought. Someone else's story would interrupt. My explanation would be shortened, simplified, and redirected. Not out of malice, but out of disinterest. Eventually, I noticed that no one was listening to the process. They were listening for outcomes they could measure against their own. When my answers did not fit neatly into comparison, they lost patience. So I stopped giving them anything that required attention. The most important decision I made did not look important at the time. It was not dramatic. It did not come with a speech or a confrontation. I simply decided that whatever I built would not be tied to my family. Not emotionally, not financially, not socially. I did not borrow money from them. I did not ask for introductions. I did not leverage the family name. I wanted something that could not be claimed, questioned, or rewritten later. Something that stood on its own even if no one clapped for it. I formed my own entity, signed my own contracts, took responsibility for outcomes without a safety net. That choice came with limits. It meant slower growth. It meant saying no to opportunities that promised speed at the cost of control. It meant learning things the hard way because there was no one to absorb the risk for me. But it also meant that nothing I built could be taken away with a conversation I was not invited to. The work itself was not glamorous. It was repetitive and often invisible. Days spent reviewing numbers that did not impress anyone. Decisions about staffing, sourcing, timing. Small adjustments that only mattered in aggregate. I started with a single location, a restaurant that had potential, but lacked consistency. The previous operators had focused on the wrong things, flash over function, image over experience. Customers came once and did not return. The numbers told the story clearly if anyone cared to read them. I spent the first year learning every part of the operation, not because I had to, but because I needed to understand where things broke before I could prevent them from breaking. I worked on the floor, on the account. I reviewed invoices. I sat in the back office until midnight, reconciling accounts that did not balance. There was one night in that first year I still remember clearly. The freezer compressor failed at 1 a.m. I got the call while I was half asleep, phone buzzing on the nightstand like an alarm I could not ignore. I drove across town in sweatpants and a coat I had grabbed without looking, met the repair technician in an empty parking lot, and stood in the walk-in cooler, watching him work while my breath fogged in front of me. $3,000 in inventory hung in the balance. Meat, seafood, prep work that had taken my kitchen staff an entire day. He fixed it by 4 a.m. I paid him in cash, drove home, showered, and opened the restaurant 6 hours later. No one knew. No one needed to. That was the night I understood what ownership actually meant, being the last person standing when everything else falls apart. The results did not come quickly. They came steadily. By year 3, the first location was consistently profitable. I opened a second the following year, smaller, more focused. By year 5, I had 4 properties under my management, 2 restaurants, and 2 boutique event venues that catered to private functions and corporate gatherings. The expansion into hospitality spaces happened almost by accident. A client who hosted events at one of my restaurants asked if I could recommend a reliable venue for larger occasions. I could not. So I found one that was struggling, negotiated a management agreement, and applied the same principles that had worked before. Consistency, accountability, quiet competence. During those same years, my family's life continued on its usual track. My brother got promoted twice. His name appeared in a trade publication, and my dad framed the article. My sister-in-law's Instagram following grew into something she called a platform. Holiday photos multiplied, each one more polished than the last. I appeared in none of them, and I noticed that absence less and less. The distance was not painful. It was productive. The portfolio I built was small, nothing flashy but stable, the kind of business that did not need to announce itself. I learned that consistency mattered more than novelty, and restraint mattered more than expansion. While other people chased scale, I chased stability. While others focused on what looked successful, I focused on what survived pressure. One decision in particular taught me more than any success ever did. In year 4, I had the chance to take over a high-profile downtown location. The numbers looked impressive on paper. The foot traffic was exceptional. The previous tenant had built a reputation that still lingered in the neighborhood, but something felt off. The lease terms were aggressive. The landlord had a history of disputes. The infrastructure needed more work than the inspection revealed. Everyone around me said I was overthinking it, that opportunities like this did not come twice, that I was being too cautious. I walked away. 6 months later, the space sat empty again. The next operator had lasted 4 months before the hidden costs overwhelmed them. I watched from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with confirmation. Instinct is just pattern recognition dressed in feeling. I had learned to trust mine. There were moments when I could have made noise. When something went well, I could have shared it, posted about it, marked it publicly. I did not. Not because I was hiding, but because I was tired of translation. Anything I shared would be reduced to a version that fit someone else's expectations. It would become either unimpressive or threatening, depending on the mood. Neither reaction interested me. I was not building a story. I was building a system. At family gatherings, nothing about me appeared different. I did not correct that impression. I did not add details that would invite scrutiny. I listened while conversations circled familiar topics, watched the same stories get retold with minor upgrades. I noticed how much energy went into appearing successful versus actually building something that lasted. My dad once asked casually how things were going. "Fine," I said. "Busy, but fine." "That is good," he said. And then he turned to my brother and asked about his golf game. I did not feel hurt by that. I felt confirmed. Whatever I was building, it was not for them. It was not meant to impress them or change their minds. It was mine. Eventually, the results stabilized. Not spectacularly, reliably. The kind of stability that does not excite people who only notice peaks and crashes. Cash flow evened out. Relationships held. Problems became smaller, more predictable. I did not need to talk about it to feel the shift. I felt it in how I planned how I slept, how little panic followed unexpected setbacks. There is a confidence that comes from repetition, from knowing you can handle the next thing, because you have handled enough of the previous ones. My family did not ask about any of it. Their silence was not hostile, it was indifferent. They assumed that if something significant had happened, they would have heard about it. When they did not, they concluded nothing had changed. That assumption did not slow me down. It freed me. I was not carrying their expectations or their doubts into my decisions anymore. I did not have to prove momentum to anyone who was not invested in the outcome. As my work expanded into rooms my family would never enter, I noticed how different the conversations felt. No one cared where I came from. No one asked who I was related to. They asked what worked, what did not, and what I planned to do next. If I had an answer, the conversation continued. If I did not, it ended. There was no emotional penalty for uncertainty, only a professional one. It was clean, direct, refreshing. The gap between my family's understanding and my reality widened gradually. They talked about success as something visible, something announced. I experienced it as something cumulative, something felt long before it was seen. I did not feel angry about it. There was no resentment, no urge to correct the record, just a quiet recognition that we were no longer measuring the same things. By the time they stopped wondering what I did, I had already stopped shrinking to fit their assumptions. They did not forget to include me. They discussed it. That was the part that took the longest to settle in my chest, heavier than surprise, sharper than disappointment. Forgetting would have been careless. This was deliberate, a choice Wade spoken aloud and agreed upon without my presence. I learned that later, not because anyone told me directly, but because decisions like that leave traces if you know where to look. The night before the gala, my family gathered without me. It was not announced as a meeting. It did not need to be. It was one of those evenings that pretended to be casual people stopping by drinks, poured conversations circling a shared focus. I was not invited, but I was mentioned. That detail arrived to me through a small slip the next day, a comment made too comfortably a schedule referenced, as if I had been there to hear it. I could picture the scene clearly enough without seeing it. My brother sat in my dad's study, drink in hand. "We need to think about optics," he said. "This isn't just a party. There are partners coming, potential investors, people who are going to remember who's in the room." My sister-in-law nodded. "The photos matter. The impression matters. We want it to look cohesive, polished." "Right," my brother said. "Aligned, professional." My mom hesitated. "Should we invite—" "Not everyone needs to be there," my sister-in-law said, her voice gentle but firm. "Some people don't really fit the moment. It's not personal. It's just curation." No one said my name. They did not have to. The absence was understood. It always is when a group has practiced this long. I was the variable that did not align cleanly with the picture they wanted to present, not because I would cause a scene, but because I could not be placed neatly in the story they were telling. I was not a risk in behavior. I was a risk in narrative. My mom hesitated again. She always did, just long enough to give herself credit for considering alternatives. But hesitation is not opposition, and she did not oppose. She asked a question that went unanswered, then let it go. My dad listened quietly, weighing the discussion not in terms of fairness, but in terms of friction. He did not like friction. He believed good leadership meant minimizing it. And in his mind, the easiest way to keep the night smooth was to remove the element that required explanation. When he spoke, it was not emotional. That was his strength and his flaw. He framed it as practical, almost administrative. "This is a work event. Family isn't necessary." The words landed softly, but they ended the conversation. No one pushed back. No one suggested a compromise. The decision settled into the room and stayed there. I knew about that conversation before the message ever arrived. Not in detail, but in outline. A calendar invite forwarded by mistake. A remark that assumed I had already been excluded. A pause when someone realized I was not on a thread. I could have intervened. I could have asked directly if I was invited, but I chose not to. I wanted the decision to be fully theirs. No ambiguity, no chance later to claim misunderstanding. My sister-in-law was the final push. She did not frame it as exclusion. She framed it as curation. She talked about an ideal family image, about keeping the focus clear. It was an elegant way to erase someone without naming them. The others nodded. Agreement did not require enthusiasm. It only required silence. My dad took responsibility in the way he always did. He did not delegate the message. He wrote it himself carefully. He waited until the timing ensured there would be no spectacle. 2 hours before the event. Close enough that any response would feel disruptive. Late enough that I could not reasonably arrive without seeming to challenge the boundary. It was a clean move, efficient, final. When the message arrived, I read it once. My thumb hovered over the screen longer than I expected. There was a tightness in my chest, not shock, more like recognition. The feeling of something I had always suspected finally said out loud. A lock clicking into place. I understood not just the words, but the strategy behind them. He was not angry. He was not trying to hurt me. He was trying to manage an outcome. In his mind, he was preserving order. He assumed I would understand, that I would accept it the way I always had. He underestimated what understanding can turn into when it has been accumulating for years. I did not respond. That silence was not confusion. It was a refusal. I did not want to negotiate my presence. I did not want to reassure him that everything was fine. I did not want to play the role of the reasonable daughter one more time. By saying nothing, I let the message stand exactly as he intended it. a boundary drawn by him, not me. What shifted that night was not my anger. It was my desire to belong. I realized with surprising calm that they were not afraid of me causing trouble. They were afraid of me complicating the story they told themselves and others. I did not fit the narrative they wanted to present, and instead of adjusting the narrative, they removed the variable. That realization did not hurt the way earlier ones had. It clarified something I had been resisting. I did not call my parents. I did not text my brother. I did not confront my sister-in-law. I did not try to correct the image forming without me. I let it form. People who remove you from a decision do not get to be rescued from the consequences of that decision. That was not revenge. It was respect for the choice they made. As the evening unfolded without me, I could feel the separation solidify. They were inside a room congratulating themselves on cohesion. I was outside aware of how carefully that cohesion had been constructed. I was not invisible. I was absent by design. And for the first time, I did not want to go back in. They thought they were protecting the event. They never asked who was protecting it. They did not misunderstand me by accident. I let them. That truth sits at the center of everything that followed, uncomfortable but precise. For years, my family carried a version of me that was incomplete, simplified, and oddly convenient. I did not rush to fix it. Not because I enjoyed being underestimated, but because I learned early that correcting people who are not listening does not change their understanding. It only hardens their resistance. To them, I was operational, useful, but not essential. Someone who handled details, not decisions. When they spoke about my work to others, it always sounded smaller than it was. She helps manage a few restaurants. She's good at keeping things running. She's more behind the scenes. The language was consistent, casual, confident. It left no room for authority. I never interrupted to clarify. I never expanded the sentence. I let it land exactly as they intended. That image stuck because it was repeated. At family gatherings, when someone asked what I did, the answer was often given for me. I would nod, smile, and let the conversation move on. My role became something that could be explained in a breath, which meant it could also be dismissed just as easily. Over time, they stopped asking altogether. The story had already been written. On paper, my position was different. Not glamorous, not flashy, but unmistakably clear. I was the final signature. The person responsible when something went right and accountable when it did not. Contracts came across my desk because they had to. Decisions stalled until I weighed in. That was not something I announced at dinner. It was simply how the work was structured. Authority in that world was not a title you introduced yourself with. It was a function you fulfilled consistently. The distance between those two realities, how my family saw me and how my work operated, widened quietly. No one bridged it because no one tried. They assumed my role was limited because it suited the hierarchy they were comfortable with. If I was not a decision maker, then excluding me was easy. If I was not central, then leaving me out carried no consequences. That assumption would later prove costly, but at the time it felt safe to them. I understood the structure of events like the Gala long before it became personal. A year-end celebration is not just a party. It looks like one from the outside, polished and seamless, but underneath it runs on layers of permission. The first layer is the most visible, the guest list, the invitations, the faces that appear in photos. That was the layer my family obsessed over, debating who belonged in the frame and who did not. The second layer is operational schedules, staffing, catering, security, the machinery that makes the evening feel effortless. And then there is the third layer, the one that does not get discussed at dinner tables or in group chats. The approval layer, funding authorization, compliance review, the person whose name closes the loop so nothing moves forward without acknowledgement. My family never touched that layer. They did not need to not in their minds. They believed relationships substituted for structure. Knowing the venue manager, being friendly with a few partners, having attended similar events before. To them, familiarity felt like control. They mistook proximity for permission and never questioned the gap between the two. The venue where the gala was scheduled was one of the two event spaces in my portfolio, the newer acquisition, a boutique property I had taken on management about 18 months earlier. The previous management had let standards slip. I negotiated an agreement that gave me operational authority and full accountability. It was not ownership in the traditional sense, but it was control where it mattered most. My name appeared on documents that most people never thought to read. That was by design. The gala request came through normal channels 2 months before the event. A year-end celebration for a professional network. Standard application, standard timeline. I reviewed the paperwork. The organizers were legitimate. The insurance was in order. The budget was approved. I signed off without thinking twice. It was one of dozens of similar approvals that month. What I did not realize was that the professional network hosting the event included my brother's business partners. The gala my family was so excited about was happening at a venue where my signature was required for anything to proceed. I discovered the connection 3 weeks before the event. An updated catering agreement crossed my desk for routine sign-off. The document was straightforward menu selections, service timeline, final head count. But at the bottom, under additional billing contacts, I saw a name I recognized. My brother's company, listed as a co-sponsor added after the original approval. I read the name twice to make sure I was not imagining it. This was their gala, the one they had excluded me from, the one my dad had sent a message to keep me away from. And it was happening in a space I controlled. I sat with that realization for a long time, not because I was angry, not because I was forming a plan. I sat with it because it clarified something I had been sensing without naming. They had not just excluded me from a party, they had excluded me from an event that could not have happened without my involvement. The irony was so complete, it almost felt staged. I could have said something then. I could have mentioned it at Sunday dinner casually just to see their reactions. I could have asked my brother about the venue, watched him stumble through an explanation of something he had never thought to verify. I did not. Not because I was planning anything, but because I had learned that correcting people who are not listening does not change their understanding. It only hardens their resistance. If I told them now, it would become a confrontation. They would find a way to make it about my tone, my timing, my attitude. The fact would get buried under the feelings it provoked. So I let the fact exist on its own, undisclosed, undefended. If they had asked one question, just one, about how these events worked, who approved them, whose name was on the documentation, they would have known. If they had shown even a passing curiosity about the venue beyond its appearance, in photos they would have seen my name in places they never thought to look. They never asked. The operations director at the venue was a woman named Patricia Richardson. We had worked together since I took over the management agreement. She was precise, experienced, and understood discretion the way only people who have worked large events can. When complex situations arose, she handled them without drama. I trusted her judgment, and she trusted mine. About a week before the gala, Patricia called me directly, not through the usual channels, a personal call. "I need to flag something," she said. "The year-end event on the 31st. I just realized one of the co-sponsors shares your last name. I wanted to make sure you were aware." "I am," I said. She paused. "Is there anything I should know? Any adjustments to the program?" "No adjustments," I said. "Everything proceeds as approved." Another pause. "Will you be attending?" I had not decided yet, but the question made me realize I already knew the answer. "I might stop by," I said, "depending on how the evening unfolds." Patricia did not ask for details. She did not need them. Professionals understand that some situations explain themselves in time. A routine email crossed my inbox a few days later, copied broadly confirming final approvals for the gala. Venue confirmed. Program locked. Timeline set. My name sat at the bottom of the approval chain exactly where it belonged. I read it, closed it, and did not reply. Nothing needed my response. The process was already complete. What struck me was not the authority itself, but the fact that no one in my family had ever thought to check who held it. The exclusion was not malicious. It was negligent. They did not ask because they did not think they needed to. They trusted a version of reality where my involvement was optional, where my absence would not affect the outcome. That belief was reinforced over years of silence, convenience, and unchecked assumptions. I did not see it as a trap. I did not feel like I had set anyone up. What unfolded later was not the result of manipulation. It was the natural consequence of decisions made without full information. I had not changed the rules. I had not shifted the structure. I simply had not intervened to correct a mistake that was not mine to fix. As the date approached, two timelines ran in parallel. My family prepared visibly confidently assured of their place. They talked about outfit schedules and arrivals. They shared plans freely among themselves, never once including me. I prepared quietly, according to obligations that existed regardless of their plans. Patricia confirmed the program sequence. The recognition segment for sponsors and supporters was scheduled for 11:35, just before the midnight countdown. Standard protocol. I had approved it weeks earlier without knowing it would matter. There was no overlap between my timeline and theirs. No coordination. Just two groups moving toward the same night with very different understandings of what it meant. They believed approval was automatic. They never asked who it belonged to. They did not explain why I was not there. They showed how comfortable they were without me. That realization arrived not through a phone call or a message meant to soften the edges, but through images that appeared one after another, framed carefully and shared widely. I was not in the room, but the room made sure I knew it was full. The absence was not an oversight. It was presented as a feature. I learned what the night looked like through my sister-in-law's posts. She did not wait. She never did when there was a narrative to control. The first image appeared at 8:47 p.m. My parents stood close, smiling wide, my brother beside them relaxed and confident. The lighting was flattering. The angle was intentional. You could tell she had taken multiple shots to get it right. The caption praised the atmosphere, the elegance, and the perfect energy of the evening. No mention of who was not there. No need. The comments filled in quickly. Beautiful family. You all look amazing. Goals. I scrolled through the responses, my jaw tightening without my permission. I unclenched it deliberately, like releasing a fist I had not realized I was making. The likes climbed, the validation accumulated. The second post came an hour later, a wider shot of the venue, guests mingling, my brother shaking hands with someone important looking. The caption, "So grateful to be surrounded by people who elevate each other." I noticed details in the background that felt familiar in a way I could not place immediately. The arrangement of the tables, the placement of the stage, the flow of the room. I knew that layout. I had seen it in the event proposal I approved. They were celebrating inside decisions they never questioned. My phone buzzed with a text from a college friend. "Saw your family's pics. Looks fancy. Were you there?" I typed back, "Couldn't make it." 3 words. True enough, the family group chat stayed quiet. That silence was not accidental either. It signaled consensus. There was nothing to clarify because everyone understood the position that had been taken. The absence had been processed and accepted. What hurt was not the post itself. It was the lack of resistance to it. No one corrected the tone. No one added a clarifying comment. No one suggested that something had been lost. The narrative stood unchallenged because it matched what they were ready to believe. That readiness had been cultivated over time through small exclusions that gradually taught everyone where I fit in the frame, just outside it. The posts continued to circulate, reaching people I had not thought about in a long time. Old acquaintances liked and commented, absorbing the version of the story presented to them. In their eyes, my family looked cohesive, successful, and unburdened. I was not erased so much as replaced by a cleaner composition. The space where I would have been was filled with ease. I noticed something else, then something small but telling. The way my sister-in-law framed the evening left no room for add-ons, no acknowledgments, no footnotes. It was a closed narrative. That closure depended on the idea that the group shown was complete. Any mention of me would have disrupted that illusion. So I remained unmentioned, and the silence did the work of exclusion without effort. I watched without commenting. I did not share. I did not send a private message asking for context or explanation. The impulse to correct the record surfaced briefly, then passed. Engaging would have meant stepping onto a stage that was not mine. It would have given the image more weight, not less. I did not screenshot anything. I did not archive the moment. There was no need to collect evidence. The story was not going to be contested later in the way they imagined. Proof was not necessary when the outcome was already set. From their perspective, the decision had worked. The event unfolded smoothly. The images looked right. The response was positive. There was no visible fallout, no awkward questions. My dad, I imagined, felt relieved. He valued outcomes that appeared orderly. My brother enjoyed the attention. My sister-in-law watched the engagement numbers climb and felt validated. The feedback loop closed neatly around them. What they did not see was how the narrative they were building required my continued silence to hold together. They assumed that silence meant acquiescence. That assumption had served them before. It allowed them to move forward without reconsidering their choices. When a group celebrates your absence, it clarifies your position within it. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a preference. And preferences once made public become boundaries. I understood then that this was not about me being unwanted. It was about me being inconvenient to a specific image. That distinction changed how the moment landed. Inconvenience can be managed. Unwantedness invites negotiation. They were not negotiating. They were curating. By choosing not to respond, I allowed the night to define itself on their terms. That choice did not diminish me. It preserved something more important. I put my phone down and looked at the clock. 10:15 p.m. The event program I had approved showed remarks scheduled for 11:30, followed by the midnight countdown. There was a line item I had barely noticed when I signed off special recognition of event sponsors and supporters. Standard protocol. Every gala had something similar. I had not thought about it then. I thought about it now. The program was locked. The sequence was set. Whatever was going to happen would happen according to a schedule that had been finalized weeks ago. I got dressed. A black dress I had bought years ago, simple, cut, good fabric, the kind of thing that looks unremarkable until you stand next to someone who spent twice as much on something flashier. I checked myself in the mirror once. I looked like someone who belonged in rooms my family did not know existed. I checked my bag for the credentials I always carried: venue access management ID, the documentation that proved I belonged in spaces they had never thought to ask about. At 10:45, I called for a car. At 11:00, I was on my way. They thought the night proved I did not belong. They did not know what the night was about to prove. They assumed approval was automatic. That assumption sat quietly beneath everything else, unexamined and unchallenged, and it was what made the rest of the night inevitable. My family confused being invited with being in charge. They believed that knowing the right people substituted for understanding how things actually worked. They mistook proximity for permission and never questioned the gap between the two. That gap was where I lived, every day in ways they never saw. Approval is not glamorous. It does not announce itself. It is a quiet checkpoint built to prevent exactly what my family assumed could not happen, an event proceeding on the strength of enthusiasm alone. The system exists to slow things down, to force accountability, to make sure responsibility is clearly assigned. Once it is done, it is done. There is no applause for it, and there is rarely a conversation about who held it. The confirmation had come through weeks earlier, an email routed broadly enough that it landed where it was supposed to. A final acknowledgement, time-stamped, documented, complete. My signature sat where it always did, unobtrusive and decisive. No one in my family checked that document. No one asked who had signed off. They did not ask because they did not think the answer mattered. In their hierarchy, I was not a decision-maker. I was peripheral, someone who handled details, not outcomes. That belief insulated them from curiosity. Why verify something you assume is irrelevant? If they had asked a single question, the story would have shifted. One email, one pause, one moment of verification. They would have learned that I was not a guest navigating an invitation. I was the final checkpoint they had walked past without noticing. But they did not ask, because asking would have meant reconsidering their assumptions about me. That was more uncomfortable than trusting what they already believed. I did not hide anything. I did not redirect messages or withhold information. I did not adjust contracts or change terms at the last minute. Everything unfolded exactly as it was designed to, according to processes that had been in place long before my family decided who did or did not belong in their pictures. Silence is not deception when no one asks. It is simply space left unfilled. I thought about all the ways they could have discovered the truth. None of them did. They trusted surfaces. They believed that if something looked right, it was right. They had never needed to dig deeper because the consequences of not digging had never touched them directly. Until now. I received a text that afternoon. It was not directed at me specifically. It was sent to the family group chat, the one I had been quietly removed from weeks earlier. But someone, probably my mom, had accidentally forwarded it to me, along with another message. "Tonight's going to be perfect. Everything's locked in." My brother's words. I read them and felt a flicker of something, not anger, not satisfaction, something closer to recognition. He believed what he was saying. He had no reason to doubt it. The structure that would contradict him was invisible to someone who had never thought to look for it. As the evening approached, their confidence solidified. They moved through preparations with ease, convinced they had handled every variable that mattered. The guest list was set. The image was curated. The optics were clean. From their perspective, control had been established. I knew better. Not because I was smarter, but because I understood how authority actually travels. It does not announce itself through familiarity or comfort. It moves through documentation, responsibility, and systems designed to outlast individual preferences. The machine does not care who feels included. It cares who is accountable. There was a moment earlier that day when I considered how easily this could have been avoided. Not with confrontation, but with curiosity. If they had paused to verify, if they had taken a second look at the structure they were stepping into, they would have realized the oversight. They would have understood that the story they were telling themselves rested on an assumption that did not hold. That realization never came because certainty feels better than checking. They walked into the gala believing the narrative was theirs, believing the room would reflect their choices back to them without complication, believing that the absence they had normalized carried no weight beyond sentiment. I watched that confidence settle from a distance, aware of how fragile it was and how little effort it would take for it to collapse on its own. There was no satisfaction in that awareness, only clarity. I was not waiting for a moment to expose anyone. I was not planning a reveal. The system did not need my intervention. It was already in motion, indifferent to personal dynamics, ready to do what it was built to do. By the time they arrived, dressed and composed, the approvals were locked. The framework was set. Nothing could be adjusted without reopening processes no one had considered. They mistook the smoothness of the evening for proof of control, not realizing that smoothness came from decisions made far outside their line of sight. I knew the sequence. I knew how the night would progress, not because I was orchestrating it in real time, but because it followed a structure I had approved weeks earlier. That knowledge did not make me anxious. It grounded me. The outcome was not dependent on emotion or confrontation. It was already written into the architecture of the event. They did not lose control that night. They never had it. The closer midnight got, the more certain they became. Certainty has a sound to it when you know how to listen. Laughter that does not check itself. Conversations that grow louder because no one feels the need to be careful anymore. The room had settled into that rhythm, the kind that comes when people believe the hardest decisions are behind them. Whatever tension had existed earlier had dissolved into confidence, reinforced by compliments, by smooth transitions, by the absence of anything visibly wrong. My family moved through the space like people who felt validated. They had already done what they came to do. Photos had been taken, hands shaken, introductions made. My brother stood taller than usual. Shoulders relaxed his attention, drifting easily from one conversation to the next. My dad looked comfortable in a way he rarely did at social events, relieved by how cleanly everything seemed to be going. My sister-in-law checked her phone with the quiet satisfaction of someone watching a narrative land exactly as intended. From their perspective, the night had already proven them right. They spoke to guests with an ease that bordered on pride. Casual reassurances slipped into conversation. "Everything came together perfectly," my brother said to a partner standing near him. "The planning committee really delivered." The partner nodded. "Great event, well organized." "We worked hard on it," my brother said. That word "we" would matter later. I watched my sister-in-law move through a cluster of women near the bar, her gestures animated, her smile practiced. She was telling a story, something that made the group laugh in unison. I could not hear the words, but I recognized the rhythm. She was performing. She always was. The phone in her hand caught the light as she angled it for another photo, another frame, another piece of evidence that the evening belonged to her. My dad stood with two men I did not recognize, nodding along to something one of them said. His posture suggested agreement, but his eyes kept drifting toward my brother, checking, confirming. He wanted to see his son succeeding in real time. That mattered more to him than any conversation he was pretending to have. My brother accepted the attention like it was owed. He laughed easily, touched shoulders, made eye contact that lingered just long enough to feel personal. He had learned how to make people feel chosen. It was a skill, and he used it well. What he had not learned was how to verify the ground beneath him before he stood on it. There were signs if anyone had been looking for them. Small deviations that meant nothing on their own, but suggested momentum moving in a direction no one in my family was tracking. A manager paused longer than necessary at the edge of a conversation, listening through an earpiece. A technician adjusted a microphone twice, then once more, eyes-focused expression unreadable. The MC reviewed her notes again, her movements precise, not hurried, but deliberate. Near the service entrance, two staff members exchanged a glance that carried weight, the kind of silent communication that happens when people know something others do not. These were not disruptions. They were confirmations. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. My family noticed none of it. Or rather, they noticed and dismissed it the way people do when they believe they have already passed the point of consequence. Operational details had never interested them. They assumed those things ran automatically independent of decision-making, like background noise you stop hearing once you trust it will not change. I arrived at the venue through the service entrance at 11:15. The corridor was quieter than the main space, lit by functional lights that made no attempt at atmosphere. Staff moved past me without a second glance. I belonged here. My credentials said so, even if my family would have found the idea absurd. At 11:20, Patricia Richardson appeared at the end of the hallway. She walked toward me with purpose, her heels clicking against the floor in a rhythm that matched her efficiency. "You made it," she said, her voice low, not a question. "I did." She glanced toward the door that led to the main event space. "They're in high spirits out there. Your brother gave a toast about 20 minutes ago, thanked everyone for making the night possible." Patricia paused. "He said something about the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people. Got a nice round of applause. I did not respond to that. There was nothing to say." Patricia continued, "The recognition segment is scheduled for 11:35. Stella has the script. She knows what to do." "Any changes to the program?" "None. Everything proceeds as approved." She paused, studying my face for something I was not giving her. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm just attending an event at a venue I help manage. The program was set weeks ago." She nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Where should I wait?" "There's a spot near the service entrance on the east side. You'll be able to see the room without being seen. When Stella finishes the introduction, the door will be your cue." I had not asked for staging. I had not requested a dramatic entrance. But Patricia understood optics the way I understood operations. She knew that timing mattered, that positioning carried meaning, that the difference between showing up and arriving was measured in seconds and angles. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "The night's not over." She turned and walked back toward the main space, disappearing through a side door without looking back. I found the spot she had described, a narrow alcove where the service corridor met the event hall. Through a gap in the partition, I could see the room clearly. The crowd was well-dressed, engaged, and comfortable. Servers circulated with champagne. The lighting was warm. The music was tasteful. Everything looked exactly as it should. My family stood near the center, positioned where they would be visible but not conspicuous. Good instincts. They knew how to work a room. What they did not know was how to read one. From outside the spotlight, the hour felt stretched, elongated by anticipation that was not quite excitement. It was the kind of tension that does not announce itself loudly, but settles into the body, quiet and insistent. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, steady but present. Not fear, awareness. I thought about what would happen next. Not the specifics, those were already determined, but the shape of it. The moment when attention would shift. The silence that would follow. The expressions on faces that had never considered me a variable worth tracking. I was not nervous. I had stopped being nervous about rooms full of people years ago. What I felt was something closer to clarity. The kind that comes when you have already made every decision that matters, and all that remains is to let the sequence complete itself. Inside, my family continued to settle into ease. The absence of conflict became proof of correctness. My dad's posture loosened his earlier caution, replaced by a sense of relief. He spoke more freely now, smiling at remarks that would have irritated him earlier in the evening. My brother laughed at a joke, clapped someone on the back, accepted a compliment without deflecting it. My sister-in-law watched the room as if it were a finished product, already ready to be remembered. They told a guest near them that the night was exactly what they had hoped for. No complications, no surprises. The phrase landed with confidence, and no one challenged it. Why would they? From where everyone stood, the statement appeared true. The evening had moved smoothly from one phase to the next, reinforcing the belief that it was complete in all the ways that mattered. At 11:28, the background music shifted, a subtle change in tempo that signaled transition. Most guests did not notice. They were not supposed to, but the staff did. Movement along the edges of the room became more purposeful. Positions were taken. Cues were confirmed. At 11:30, the music faded entirely. People began orienting toward the stage, drinks lowered conversations, paused mid-sentence. At 11:33, Stella stepped up to the microphone. The MC moved with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Her presence was commanding without being dramatic. This was her domain now. She held the room effortlessly accustomed to moments like this, to spaces where attention crystallizes all at once. I watched my family watch her. They looked relaxed, expectant, ready for the next phase of an evening they believed they controlled. My dad adjusted his jacket slightly, a habit he had when he wanted to look composed. My brother whispered something to my sister-in-law, who smiled without taking her eyes off the stage. They were waiting for acknowledgement, for validation, for the room to confirm what they already believed about themselves. No one in my family sensed the shift for what it was. They did not recognize the pause as a threshold. They did not understand that the room had reached a point where momentum could no longer be redirected. The structure they had walked into was about to assert itself, indifferent to their assumptions, immune to their confidence. I took a breath, steadied myself. I placed my hand on the door. They thought midnight would celebrate them. They did not know who it would introduce. The room fell quiet, not because something ended, but because something was about to begin. The room went quiet before anyone understood why. It was not the kind of silence that arrives on command or courtesy, not the polite hush people offer when they think they are supposed to listen. This silence came first instinctive and unsettled, like the air shifting before a storm you did not see forming. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence. Glasses stopped clinking. Even the background music seemed to retreat, as if it sensed it was about to become irrelevant. Stella stepped onto the stage without fanfare. No dramatic entrance, no flourish designed to pull attention toward her. She did not need it. She had done this hundreds of times, maybe thousands, and her body carried that certainty. She stood straight, shoulders relaxed, posture neutral, but grounded the way people stand when they are there to do a job, not to be admired. From where my family stood, she was just the MC, the facilitator. The voice that bridged one segment of the night to the next, someone functional, someone safe. They did not look at her closely. They did not need to. To them, this part of the evening was automatic. They had already checked the boxes that mattered in their minds. Stella was just the messenger, not the message. The authority of the night, they believed, rested elsewhere. She smiled briefly, professional, and contained then began with the opening lines everyone expected. She thanked the guests for being there, her voice clear and steady. She acknowledged the partners, the teams who had worked behind the scenes, the people whose efforts made the evening smooth. Names were generalized roles, grouped credit, distributed in a way that felt fair and unremarkable. Heads nodded. People relaxed again, reassured that this was unfolding exactly as predicted. My brother leaned slightly towards someone beside him, murmuring a comment too quiet to carry. My sister-in-law glanced around the room, already scanning for reactions, already anticipating how this would look later, when frozen into images and captions. My dad adjusted his stance weight, shifting comfortably from one foot to the other. This was familiar territory. This was what closure sounded like. Then Stella paused. It was subtle, just a fraction longer than necessary to turn a page or take a breath, but it was enough. Enough for the room to recalibrate, enough for attention to sharpen. When she spoke again, her tone had changed, not louder, not more dramatic, but slower, deliberate, in a way that signaled intention rather than routine. "Before we welcome the new year," she said, and the words landed differently now, "I want to take a moment to recognize someone very important." The room quieted further. This event could not have happened without the approval and support of our venue's management team. And tonight I'm pleased to say that the person who personally signed off on this celebration, who made it possible for all of us to be here, is with us. That was when the silence took on weight. A few people straightened instinctively, the way professionals do when a familiar phrase suddenly carries unexpected significance. Somewhere near the front, a conversation cut off completely. Someone's hand froze halfway to a glass. The word "approved" echoed through the space, reframing what this moment was about. Stella did not rush. She let the pause stretch just enough to allow comprehension to ripple outward unevenly. Some people understood immediately, their expressions shifting as pieces clicked into place. Others did not, their brows knitting slightly as they tried to align this statement with the assumptions they had been carrying all evening. "This event," Stella continued, her voice steady, "could not have happened without her sign-off. And for a small but noticeable group in the room, that sentence landed like a revelation. They knew what that meant. They knew what kind of authority it implied, what kind of position required that level of responsibility. Their attention sharpened, further eyes scanning not the stage but the crowd, already searching for the person whose absence or presence would now matter more than anything else that had happened that night. My family was not part of that group, not yet. They heard the words, but they did not hear the implications. Approval to them was still abstract, still something that happened somewhere else, handled by systems they did not need to think about. They had not connected the concept to a person they knew, let alone to someone they had deliberately excluded. Stella paused again. This time the silence was unmistakable. It pressed in from all sides, no longer neutral, no longer comfortable. She did not say a name. She did not gesture. She simply allowed the moment to hold, and in that space control slipped away from the people who believed they had it. My sister-in-law's gaze flicked toward the entrance, then back to the stage, then toward the cluster of people nearest her. Her expression shifted subtly, the polished composure cracking just enough to reveal calculation. She was trying to locate the missing piece, trying to understand where the narrative had deviated from the version she had rehearsed. My dad's jaw tightened. Not visibly, not in a way that would draw attention, but enough that someone standing close might notice the change. He stood straighter now, alert in a way he had not been minutes earlier. This was not how this part was supposed to go. He searched Stella's face for cues, for reassurance that this was still procedural, still harmless. My brother leaned in again, whispering something this time with urgency rather than ease. No one answered him. The people around him were no longer listening. Their attention had shifted, pulled toward a question that had not existed for them before this moment. Who? Stella spoke again, and her words were gentle, almost warm. "She sends her warm New Year wishes to all of you," she said, smiling slightly, as if sharing something personal, something generous. The pronoun hung there unmistakable. She, not a company, not a department, a person, female, specific. The room absorbed this collectively, the silence deepening into something electric. Several guests exchanged quick looks, recognition passing between them without words. They had already guessed. They were already ahead of the moment. My family was not. They were still trying to reconcile the absence. My sister-in-law looked around more openly now, her eyes scanning faces, counting, recalculating. My dad's composure thinned further, the confident host replaced by someone trying to understand a situation that had slipped beyond his grasp. My brother stopped whispering altogether, his attention fixed forward, waiting for clarity that was not coming from the stage. Stella did not say my name. She did not need to. The power of the moment was no longer in the announcement, but in the delay. The room leaned into the uncertainty breath held awareness heightened. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was no longer passive. It was expectant. "Please join me in welcoming her," Stella said. She looked toward the back of the room, toward me. They were still looking at the stage. They did not know the door was already opening. No one announced my name. Stella had done enough. I did not need more. The door opened at the exact moment the room was holding its breath, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to let a slice of motion interrupt the stillness. The sound was not what drew attention. It was the timing. People turned because something in the rhythm of the night had shifted, because the pause Stella left behind had created space, and that space was suddenly filled. I stepped inside without hurry. There was no rush to claim the moment, no need to compete with it. The room adjusted around me instead. A few guests closest to the entrance recognized me immediately. I had worked with some of them before venue inspections, contract negotiations, the ordinary business of keeping properties running. They knew my face. They knew my role. Their expressions changed in small ways. Brows lifted, postures straightened. One man, a developer I had dealt with last year, actually smiled. "Well," he murmured to his wife, "that's interesting." The recognition spread unevenly through the room. Some people followed the gaze of others, turning only because attention itself had become directional. Those who knew what approval meant did not need explanation. They had already connected the words Stella spoke to the person now walking into the room, and that realization recalibrated everything they thought they knew about the evening. My family noticed last, not because they were not watching, but because they were watching the wrong place. When they finally turned, it was not curiosity that froze them, it was context arriving too late. My sister-in-law's smile faltered, first the expression slipping before she could catch it. She looked at me then, around her searching for cues for confirmation that she had not misread what was happening. My brother's shoulders tightened. He did not move toward me or away. He just stood there, caught between reactions. My dad did not move at all. He watched me walk forward with an expression I could not quite read. Not anger, not confusion, something closer to recalculation. I did not look at them. Not deliberately, not pointedly, just naturally. My attention stayed forward toward the stage, toward Stella, toward the space that had already made room for me. This was not avoidance. It was an alignment. I was not there to meet their eyes or to measure their reactions. I was there because I belonged in that moment, regardless of who was watching. As I walked, the room continued to adjust. People who had been standing in clusters shifted slightly, creating pathways without realizing they were doing it. A few nodded as I passed small acknowledgments that carried more weight than any greeting. There was no applause, no whispering commentary, just an awareness settling in a collective recalibration of social gravity. Stella caught my eye then. It was brief, professional, but clear. She did not smile wider or say anything further. She did not need to. She stepped half a pace to the side, a movement so subtle it might have gone unnoticed if not for its precision. In that gesture, space was transferred. Not claimed, not demanded, simply yielded where it had always belonged. My family saw that too. My sister-in-law's gaze snapped to the stage, then back to me, then back again, her composure visibly straining under the effort of adjustment. My brother looked down, the gesture unconscious, as if eye contact with the floor might buy him a second to regroup. My dad's authority, the quiet certainty he carried into rooms, failed him here. He was not contradicted. He was not challenged. He was simply no longer the reference point. I reached the front without pause. The distance I covered felt longer to the people watching than it did to me, stretched by the silence that followed each step. When I stopped, I did not turn outward immediately. I faced the room as a whole, not any individual within it. Someone placed a glass in my hand without asking, the exchange, seamless, instinctive. I accepted it with a nod, fingers settling around it easily. Only then did I speak. No preamble, no framing, no acknowledgement of the tension thick in the air. "Happy New Year," I said, my voice even carrying without effort. "And thank you for being here tonight." That was it. No names, no clarifications, no references to what had come before. The words were neutral, but neutrality in that moment was decisive. They did not invite debate or interpretation. They did not reopen questions. They closed them. The silence that followed was immediate and complete. It was not awkward. It was not confusing. It was clarifying. People processed what they had just witnessed, recalculating relationships, reassessing assumptions. No one rushed to applaud, because applause implies performance, and this was not that. This was recognition settling into place. My sister-in-law tried to recover first. Her smile returned tighter now, less certain, as she glanced around to see how others were reacting. The room offered her no guidance. People were not looking at her. They were not looking at my dad or my brother either. Attention had redistributed itself, and the absence of engagement spoke louder than any overt slight. Gradually, the program resumed. Lights shifted back toward the stage. Music returned softer at first, then finding its rhythm again. The evening continued, not because anything had been resolved, but because nothing needed to be. The structure held. The event moved forward exactly as planned. Conversations restarted around us, but their tone had changed. Guests who approached did so with intention, their words measured their focus precise. Some addressed me directly, others spoke to Stella or the team, but the lines of authority were now unmistakable. My family remained where they were present, but unmoored included yet peripheral in a way they had never experienced before. I did not seek them out. I did not avoid them either. Their reactions were not my responsibility, and their understanding was no longer required. The night unfolded without confrontation, without resolution, without a single raised voice. Everything that needed to be communicated had already been understood. As the room settled into its new equilibrium, I stood where I had always stood, even when no one had noticed. I had not taken anything from them. I had not corrected them. I had not asked for acknowledgement or demanded space. I had simply arrived where I belonged, and the world adjusted accordingly. The party went on. Their certainty did not. Music returned to its previous volume, and conversations resumed, but the tone had shifted in a way that could not be corrected with smiles or proximity. People spoke a little closer, now lowered their voices, recalibrated where they stood and who they stood near. The room was still full, still elegant, still functioning exactly as intended, yet the center of gravity had moved, and everyone felt it, even if they could not articulate why. Guests began to do what experienced people always do after a public recalibration. They connected information quietly. A glance toward me, a look back at my dad, then a subtle step away. Someone who had been mid-conversation with my brother redirected smoothly, offering a polite nod before drifting toward a different cluster. No one announced these decisions. They unfolded naturally, guided by instinct and self-preservation rather than malice. Reputation rarely collapses in a crash. It leaks out through 100 small absences. Partners who understood structure recognized the shift first. They did not approach me with congratulations or questions. They adjusted their language instead. Titles became more precise. Requests were framed more carefully. When they spoke, they made sure to include me in the line of sight, even if the words were directed elsewhere. They were not currying favor. They were aligning with reality. The difference mattered. And as they adjusted the story my family had been telling about themselves, lost its authority. My dad tried to hold his posture to remain the man who entered rooms as if decisions waited for him. He nodded when people passed and offered the same measured expressions he always had. The problem was that no one lingered. No one asked for his take. No one checked his reaction before moving on. Authority without acknowledgement has a way of evaporating, and by the time he realized what was happening, the room had already decided he was no longer the reference point. My brother fared no better. He smiled when spoken to, laughed a fraction too late, nodded too quickly. Twice he started a story only to have it interrupted by someone who had already turned their body elsewhere. Each time he stopped mid-sentence, the words dissolving into an expression he could not quite manage. He was not dismissed outright. He was rendered optional, and optional in rooms like this is a dangerous place to be. Later that night, he found me near the bar. "Hey," he said, his voice falsely casual. "Didn't know you were coming." "I wasn't invited," I said simply. "To the family portion, anyway." He winced slightly. "Look about that." "You don't need to explain," I said. "Dad sent the message. I got it." "It wasn't personal." "I know. It was practical." He did not have a response to that. Practical was exactly the word they would have used to justify it. Hearing it reflected back at him seemed to unsettle something. "We should talk," he said. "Later, when things calm down." "Sure," I said, "if you want." I did not promise anything. I did not close any doors. I just let the conversation end where it was. My sister-in-law watched it all with a different kind of panic. She had always understood narrative, how images create meaning and repetition becomes truth. She checked her phone more than once, her thumb hovering over the screen, as if she could still edit the evening retroactively. The post she had shared earlier now worked against her, its certainty exposed by the quiet contradiction unfolding around us. People who had liked it hours ago glanced at her differently now, curiosity replacing agreement. She had controlled the picture until reality introduced itself. I did not intervene. I did not offer context or clarification. I did not recount the message I had received, or the decision that had been made without me. I did not need to. The room already had the information it required. As the event wound down, guests exchanged final pleasantries. Cars were called. The night reached its natural conclusion. My dad found me near the exit. "We should talk," he said. The same words my brother had used, but his tone was different, quieter, less certain. "Okay," I said. "Not here. Tomorrow. Or whenever you're free." I looked at him. The man who had sent me that message. The man who had decided along with everyone else that I did not fit the picture they wanted to present. He looked tired. Not beaten. Just tired. "I'll let you know," I said. Later that night, after the room had thinned and the remaining conversations lost their urgency, my dad finally reached for his phone. The message came through without preamble or apology. It did not reference the gala or the decision that had started everything. It was careful, neutral, stripped of authority it no longer possessed. "We should talk soon. It might be good to clear the air." The wording mattered. He was not summoning me. He was asking, even if he did not know how to frame it that way yet. I did not respond immediately, not out of spite, not to regain leverage, but because immediacy was no longer required. The urgency that had once governed our interactions had belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. In the days that followed, the consequences became clearer. Invitations arrived that did not include my family by default. Questions surfaced in quiet channels, phrased politely but pointedly enough to signal a recalibration of trust. My sister-in-law stopped posting altogether for a while, the silence louder than any caption. My brother retreated from spaces he had once occupied, comfortably citing busyness that fooled no one. My dad maintained his routines, but without the same audience, the same deference, the same certainty. What they lost was not access to me or even proximity. It was the ability to define the terms under which I existed. Silence took that from them, not as a punishment, but as a consequence. They could still speak. They just could not be assumed correct anymore. They wanted a conversation. I wanted clarity. The year did not start with celebration. It started without noise. Morning light came in the same way it always had, indifferent to what had happened the night before. And for the first time in a long while, I did not feel the urge to check my phone immediately. There were no alerts demanding attention, no messages that needed an instant response. The absence itself felt deliberate, like space that had finally been cleared. When I did look, the screen showed exactly what I expected. One message from my dad. No subject, no apology, no framing, just a sentence that hovered without direction. "We should talk." It was not a command. It was not even a request. Not really. It was an acknowledgement stripped down to its essentials, the first one I could remember that did not assume my availability. I did not answer right away, not because I was unsure, and not because I was afraid of reopening anything. I simply did not feel rushed. There was a time when I would have responded immediately, eager to resolve the tension, eager to prove that I was reasonable, cooperative, still reachable. That reflex was gone. In its place was something quieter and far more stable, the understanding that timing belonged to me now. The hours passed without incident. No follow-up texts, no calls, no triangulated messages sent through my brother or my mother. The silence held not as punishment, but as acceptance. Somewhere in that stillness a line had been drawn that no longer needed defending. My brother and his wife remained quiet too. No posts, no carefully framed updates. The version of family life they had curated so confidently before had stalled, its momentum gone. Their silence was not restrained, it was disorientating. Without the ability to narrate themselves against me, they did not seem to know what story to tell. Later that afternoon, I called my mom back. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "How are you?" "I'm fine," I said. "You wanted me to call. Your father was hoping you could come over today, just to talk." "About what?" A pause. "About last night. About everything, I suppose." "I'm free this afternoon," I said. "Around 3. "That works. I'll let him know." Another pause. "Mom?" "Yes." "Did you know about the message he sent me?" She did not answer for a long moment. "I knew there was a discussion," she finally said, "about the guest list. I should have said something. I'm sorry." It was not much, but it was more than I had expected. At 3:00 p.m., I parked in my parents' driveway. The house looked the same as always, neat lawn-trimmed hedges, the appearance of a life without complications. My dad met me at the door. He was wearing casual clothes, weekend attire, but his posture was formal. "Thanks for coming," he said. I nodded and stepped inside. We sat in the living room, the same room where family meetings had happened for as long as I could remember. The couch I sat on still had the indent from years of the same people sitting in the same spots. My mom brought coffee in the mugs we had used since I was a child, white with blue trim slightly chipped at the handles. She set them down, looked at both of us, then excused herself. The door to the kitchen closed softly behind her. This conversation was between him and me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then my dad said, "I didn't know." "Know what?" "About your involvement, with the venue, with the—" He stopped searching for words. "I didn't know you had that kind of responsibility." "You never asked." He absorbed that. "No," he said, "I didn't." Another silence. "The message I sent," he continued, "it wasn't meant to—" "To what?" I asked, not harshly, just clearly. "To hurt me, to exclude me, to make sure I knew where I ranked." He flinched slightly. "To keep things simple. For who?" He did not answer immediately, then quieter. "I sent that message because defending you to your brother felt harder than leaving you out. That was easier for me, not fair to you." He looked down at his hands. "I know that now." It was not a full apology, but it was honest, and honesty from him was rare enough to matter. "Dad," I said, leaning forward, "I'm not looking for an apology. I'm not even looking for an explanation. What I want you to understand is this: you made a choice. You chose to exclude me based on what you assumed about my life, my work, my value. Those assumptions were wrong, and you never bothered to check." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." "Good," I said. "Then we don't need to keep discussing it." I stood up. "That's it," he asked. "What else is there?" He looked at me, really looked, maybe for the first time in years. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought there would be more." "There doesn't have to be," I said. "Sometimes the lesson is the ending." I walked to the door. He followed. "Can we—" He started, then stopped. "Can we do better? Going forward?" I turned to face him. The man who had underestimated me. The man who had excluded me. The man who was now asking for something he had not earned. "We can try," I said, "but it starts with you seeing me clearly. Not the version that's convenient, the actual person." He nodded again. "I'd like that." "Then we'll see," I said. I drove away without making any promises. Some things cannot be fixed with one conversation, but they can start to shift. The months that followed were not dramatic. No grand reconciliation, no tearful apologies at Sunday dinners, just small adjustments like a house settling after a storm. My brother called once in February ostensibly about a tax question, but the conversation lasted longer than it needed to. My dad forwarded me an article about restaurant trends with no comment attached, just the link and my name. Small gestures, tentative, but present. I realized then how often power had been mistaken for inclusion. Invitations, approvals, seats at tables, those had always been presented as proof of worth when they were really just tools of leverage. The night of the gala had not changed that truth. It had exposed it. Power was never about being included. It was about not needing the invitation. I thought briefly about the version of myself that had waited to be chosen. The one who explained her work carefully, minimized her achievements, softened her language to avoid discomfort. The one who would have replied to my dad's message within minutes, eager to smooth things over, eager to prove she was still reasonable, still reachable, still worthy of inclusion. She had done her job. She had carried me through a system that rewarded silence and punished clarity. I did not resent her. She had kept me safe when safe was all I could afford to be. But she had served her purpose, and somewhere between the gala and this quiet morning, she had stepped aside. Life resumed its ordinary pace. Work continued grounded in routines that did not depend on family perception. Meetings, decisions, plans, all moved forward without the friction that had once accompanied them. The people I worked with did not ask me to justify my presence. They did not need backstory or context. They responded to results, to consistency, to clarity. It was easier. It always has been. At Easter dinner that year, my niece, my brother's daughter, 7 years old, asked me what I did for work. Before I could answer, my brother jumped in. "Your aunt runs restaurants," he said. "Important ones. She's the person who makes sure everything works right." I looked at him. He shrugged slightly, almost embarrassed. "Just telling her the truth," he said. It was a small moment, easy to miss, but it meant something. The story they told about me had finally changed. There was no final conversation that tied everything together. No scene where misunderstandings were cleared and feelings were validated. That kind of ending belongs to a different story. In this one, clarity replaced closure, and that was enough. The need to be understood had dissolved, replaced by the freedom to simply be. I still think about that night sometimes, not with anger, not with triumph, just with a kind of quiet satisfaction. They thought excluding me would simplify things. They thought my absence would make their picture cleaner. They did not realize I was the frame. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be seen, waiting for the invitation, waiting for permission, waiting for someone else to decide they matter. I stopped waiting, and that made all the difference. They did not lose me that night. They lost the version of me who waited to be chosen. If you have ever been excluded, ignored, or quietly erased, and later realized the room only worked because of you, tell your story in the comments. And if stories about quiet strength, delayed justice, and reclaiming your place resonate with you, consider liking and subscribing. Sometimes the loudest revenge is simply living well,